The night sky has always been a place of mystery. People looked at the stars for thousands of years, wondering if someone else was out there. Some believed the universe was too big to only hold humans. Others laughed at the thought of visitors from the stars. But on a quiet evening, without any warning, the truth began to show itself. It did not happen with a loud bang, nor with flashing lights. It started with silence. A strange kind of silence that felt heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. In a hidden observatory, far from the noise of big cities, a group of scientists were watching the sky. They expected to see nothing unusual, just the usual lights of stars and planets. But one of them noticed a pattern in the radio signals, something that did not belong to nature. The signals repeated themselves, not like random noise. They carried rhythm, a design, almost like a language. At first, the scientists thought it could be interference, maybe a mistake in the machines. But as the hours passed, the signals grew clearer. Someone, or something, was sending them. The discovery was kept secret at first. No official announcements, no breaking news on television. Only a few people knew. They worked in silence, trying to decode the meaning behind the signals. Some said it was just a test, maybe from another country. But deep down, the scientists felt it was something far beyond human hands. Then strange lights began appearing in the sky. They were not like shooting stars that burned quickly and disappeared. These lights moved slowly with purpose, as if guided by an unseen hand. People from small towns reported them first, thinking they were planes or satellites. But soon, the lights were seen over oceans, forests, and even deserts. They moved with patterns that no human machine could follow. The governments of the world were confused. Should they tell people the truth or keep it hidden? Fear could spread if people thought visitors from the stars had arrived. For weeks, nothing was confirmed, but whispers grew louder. Videos taken by ordinary people began to appear on the internet. Strange glowing shapes floating above the clouds, moving too fast to be explained. Then, without warning, they came closer. Ships did not look like the flying saucers people imagined in movies. They were silent, dark, and enormous. They looked like giant shadows against the night sky. Some were shaped like triangles, others like smooth arcs, and some were impossible to describe, as if they bent the very air around them. People stood in streets, staring at the silent giants above, unsure whether to be afraid or amazed. But what was most strange was that the ships did nothing. They did not attack, they did not land, they did not speak. They just watched, floating in the sky, high above cities and villages, almost invisible during the day, but glowing faintly at night. It was as if the whole world had been placed under a quiet test. Humans waited. Every day, people looked up, asking the same question: what do they want? At first, some thought they had come in peace, perhaps to share knowledge. Others feared they were preparing to take control. But as days turned into weeks, the silence became more frightening than any battle. Inside the ships, things were not as still as they appeared. The visitors were studying every detail of human life. They watched families eat together, children play in streets, workers travel to their jobs, leaders give speeches. Every action was recorded, every pattern analyzed. To them, humans were not individuals, but subjects of study. They measured fear by releasing small signals into the air, unseen waves that made people feel restless. They measured trust by creating illusions, simple lights in the sky, to see how quickly humans shared them online. Every detail of behavior, every reaction was collected. The visitors believed that once they understood the human mind, control would be easy. But what they did not realize was that humans were not like other species. They could not be measured so simply. In one place, a crowd might panic at the sight of a glowing light. In another, children might laugh and clap, thinking, It was part of a festival. In one country, leaders tried to calm people with kind words. In another, they spoke of defense and war. The visitors expected humans to behave the same everywhere, but instead they found confusion, diversity, and unpredictability. The silence of the ships began to change the world. People in cities grew anxious, unable to sleep, always looking at the skies. Farmers in villages prayed more often, asking for protection. Young people posted videos, turning the unknown into entertainment, creating songs and stories about the ships. Some even gathered in groups, standing under the night sky waiting for a sign. The world stood between fear and wonder. For some, the silent ships were a threat. For others, they were a promise of something greater. But in every heart, one question burned. Why were they here? Weeks turned into months, and still the ships did not move closer. They circled the earth like shadows, waiting. Scientists struggled to make sense of their silence. They had prepared to welcome visitors who might speak, or share, but not ones who only watched. People argued in governments, some saying they should make contact, others warning to stay quiet. Meanwhile, the visitors watched with patience. They had crossed the stars with a perfect plan, certain of their victory. To them, humans were fragile, small, and easy to control. They did not see strength in the noise of laughter, the fire of defiance, or the quiet unity that grew when people faced fear together. The silent arrival was only the beginning. The world did not yet know that this quiet study would lead to something greater, something no visitor could predict. For in the silence of those ships, the seeds of humanity's greatest test were being planted. And while the visitors believed, they had planned for everything. They had forgotten one truth: humans were never as simple as they appeared. When the silent ships first appeared, most people thought they were only watching. But slowly, without anyone realizing, something deeper had already started. It was not an open war, not a loud invasion, but something quieter, something hidden. The visitors had come with a plan, and the world itself had become their laboratory. At first, no one noticed. People continued with their daily lives, going to work, eating dinner with family, meeting friends in cafes, scrolling through endless posts online. The ships floated in the sky like quiet giants, and though they made people uneasy, humans still tried to live as if everything was normal. But slowly, strange things began to happen. Things too small to seem dangerous at first. Streetlights flickered without reason in certain towns. Birds flew in odd patterns, circling the same spot again and again before vanishing. Some people swore. Their dreams felt too real, as if they were being guided or shaped by someone else. It was dismissed as stress, as the natural fear of seeing ships above the clouds. But the truth was far more unsettling. The visitors were already running experiments, testing the limits of human behavior. They started small. In one city, a strange pulse went through the air, completely invisible. People walking down the street suddenly felt irritable for no reason. Arguments broke out over parking spaces, over spilled coffee, even between friends who usually laughed together. Then, as quickly as it began, the pulse stopped. Within minutes, people calmed down again, wondering why they had acted so strangely. In another place, the opposite happened. A signal spread through the night, and suddenly a whole neighborhood felt unusually peaceful. Neighbors who barely spoke to each other shared food, helped one another, and stayed up late under the stars, talking about the ships above. The next morning, they could not explain why they had been so kind, why their fear had disappeared for a single night. The visitors were not trying to harm anyone, at least not yet. They were studying. They wanted to see how easily emotions could be pushed and pulled like strings. They wanted to know if humans could be controlled without them even realizing it. To the visitors, this was only the beginning. But humans are not simple. Some people noticed the patterns. In small groups online, ordinary men and women started sharing stories that sounded too similar to be accidents. A woman in one part of the world spoke of how her entire town felt unusually cheerful for no reason one night. A man far away told of how his neighborhood nearly broke into fights over nothing at all. When they compared their experiences, they realized the dates and times lined up with sightings of the silent ships. Meanwhile, governments tried to keep things calm. They told people the lights were only weather balloons or experimental aircraft. They told them the strange feelings were stress from reading too much news, but people are not so easy to silence. When enough voices rise together, truth begins to find its way. The visitors noticed this too. They had expected humans to act like other species, predictable, easy to shape. But every time they pushed, humanity responded in different ways. Some grew afraid. Some laughed. Some resisted. Others ignored everything and went on with their lives. The unpredictability of human minds was already creating cracks in the visitors' perfect plan. The experiments continued. In villages, cattle suddenly gathered in straight lines facing the sky as if listening to an unseen command. In cities, phones lit up at the same moment with strange static, lasting only seconds before disappearing. In schools, children began to draw the same unusual shapes, even though they had never seen them before. Teachers dismissed it as imagination, but some children insisted that the shapes came to them in dreams. The strangest thing of all was how people reacted differently. Some dismissed everything, calling it coincidence. Others grew fascinated, even inspired, believing the visitors were teaching humanity something important. But there were also those who grew suspicious, who began to prepare for something darker. Humanity was dividing not because of direct attacks, but because of subtle whispers planted in their lives. One night, an entire town lost power for exactly 15 minutes. In that darkness, people reported hearing voices, not loud, not clear, but faint whispers that seemed to echo in their minds. Some heard words of comfort, others heard commands, and a few heard only strange tones that made no sense at all. When the lights returned, people argued about what they had experienced. It was as if the same event had created 100 different truths. This was exactly what the visitors wanted: confusion, division, data. To them, humans were like puzzles waiting to be solved. But no matter how much they studied, the pieces did not fit neatly together. One person would panic, another would laugh, and another would question everything. To the visitors, this made no sense. How could one species carry so many contradictions inside them? But while the visitors searched for answers, humanity was also learning. Small groups of scientists, hidden from public eyes, began comparing data. They saw the unusual signals, the strange timing, the emotional shifts. They knew it was no accident. Some of them argued that the visitors were testing the limits of the human mind, looking for weaknesses. Others believed it was more than that the visitors were afraid, and testing was their way of understanding what they did not know. Meanwhile, ordinary people reacted in their own ways. Some ignored everything, refusing to let fear control their lives. Others turned to faith, believing the visitors were part of a bigger plan written long ago. Young people joked about it online, making stories and memes, turning fear into humor. This made the visitors even more confused. Why would humans laugh when faced with the unknown? Why would they joke about something that could destroy them? The hidden experiment was supposed to be simple. Push emotions here, pull thoughts there, and watch humanity bend. But instead, what they saw was resistance in forms they did not understand. Jokes, songs, prayers, even stubborn silence. These were things no calculation could predict, no machine could fully measure. Weeks passed, and the experiments grew bolder. Entire regions felt waves of calm or fear. Some nights the skies glowed faintly, filled with shapes too perfect to be natural. People began to record more, share more, and question more. The more the visitors tried to study humanity in secret, the more visible their presence became. And then something happened the visitors had not expected. Humanity began experimenting back. Amateur radio groups tried sending signals toward the sky. Villagers in remote places lit fires in patterns on the ground, hoping to send messages. Children released balloons with drawings of stars and questions tied to them. Humans were no longer just reacting. They were reaching back. This was the first small crack in the visitors' plan. They had expected silence, fear, and submission. But instead, humanity answered curiosity with curiosity, confusion with creativity. What was meant to be a hidden experiment had become something far greater, a two-way test neither side fully understood. The visitors still believed they held control. They thought their study was going perfectly, that they were one step closer to bending humanity to their will. But beneath the surface, something powerful was growing. A quiet realization was spreading across the world. Humans were not simply subjects of an experiment. They were thinkers, dreamers, and fighters. And even in silence, even under watchful eyes, their minds could never truly be controlled. The hidden experiment was far from over. But already, the visitors were beginning to see the first signs of a truth that would shake their perfect plan apart. Humanity was not just surviving the test, they were changing the rules of the game. The hidden experiments had gone on for weeks, maybe months. People were confused, divided, and curious all at once. The visitors believed they were in control. They thought they had mapped human behavior and could bend it at will. But what came next was something they had not planned for, something no test could predict: rebellion. And the most surprising part? It did not begin with soldiers or governments. It began with ordinary people. It started small. In one town, people noticed that every time the sky pulsed with a faint glow, their emotions shifted. Some grew anxious, others unusually calm. Instead of ignoring it, a group of neighbors began meeting at night to talk about what they felt. They compared notes, wrote down times, and soon realized a pattern. The sky's glow, the strange dreams, the sudden changes in mood, they all connected. One evening, instead of just watching, they decided to fight back in their own way. They stood together in the open field and sang loudly, their voices rising into the night. It was not a song of fear, but of unity. Strangely, the glow in the sky faded sooner than usual. People laughed nervously, wondering if their voices had somehow disrupted the experiment. That moment planted a seed. Maybe humans were not as helpless as they had been made to feel. In another city, young people noticed that their phones picked up static whenever the experiments were strongest. Instead of ignoring it, they recorded the strange sounds and shared them online. Millions listened, some calling it alien language, others calling it nothing more than interference. But the act of sharing gave people a sense of connection. No matter where they lived, no matter their culture or language, they realized they were all experiencing the same strange signs. That shared awareness became a quiet rebellion of its own. Soon, people began experimenting back. Families left their lights on all night, creating patterns of brightness visible from the sky. Farmers plowed their fields in strange shapes, hoping the visitors would see. Children painted symbols on rooftops, not to surrender, but to declare, "We know you are there." The rebellion was not about weapons or violence. It was about refusing to be silent subjects. Humans were unpredictable, and their way of fighting was through creativity, laughter, and defiance in small ways. Governments struggled to keep control of the situation. Some wanted to calm the population, insisting nothing unusual was happening. Others quietly studied the data and realized the people were right. The visitors were influencing them. For the first time, leaders and citizens found themselves facing the same mystery together. And in that rare unity, something powerful began to form. The visitors, watching from above, did not understand. Their tests were meant to divide, to confuse, to weaken. Yet everywhere they looked, humans were doing the opposite. Where fear was planted, laughter grew. Where confusion was spread, cooperation appeared. What they thought would break humanity was, instead, strengthening it. One of the most remarkable events happened in a small coastal town. Every evening, when the strange glow appeared in the sky, people gathered on the beach. They lit bonfires, shared food, and told stories. Some played instruments, others danced. Instead of being filled with fear, the beach became alive with celebration. The visitors tried shifting emotions there again, but nothing worked. The laughter, music, and human connection overpowered every attempt. What was supposed to be a quiet test site had become a symbol of resistance. The rebellion spread in unusual ways. Artists painted massive murals on city walls, turning the fear of ships into powerful images of human strength. Writers crafted stories and poems, spreading hope. Teachers encouraged children to ask questions instead of staying silent. Even jokes became part of the movement. Humans laughed at the visitors, making fun of their silence, their glowing lights, their experiments. That humor, simple as it seemed, made the visitors lose control of the narrative. The most surprising act of rebellion came not from cities, but from villages, places often overlooked. In remote areas, people who did not even have much technology noticed strange signals in the sky. Instead of being afraid, they lit fires in wide circles and sang into the night. For them, it was not rebellion, but tradition. An old way of showing that their land belonged to them, not to silent watchers above. But when pictures of those circles reached the world, they became a symbol of defiance. Humanity was not hiding. It was showing itself proudly. The visitors grew unsettled. Their plan had been simple: observe, manipulate, control. But now their experiments were facing resistance they had never calculated. They could not understand why humans did not break. They could not understand why fear turned into unity, why division created connection. The rebellion was not coordinated by leaders or armies. It was led by ordinary people: farmers, children, artists, teachers, workers. Each small act of defiance joined with the others until it became something bigger than anyone expected. Humanity was not waiting for instructions. Humanity was writing its own answer. Scientists, who had been quietly studying the signals, began to notice something extraordinary. The more people resisted, through songs, laughter, art, the weaker the experiments seemed to become. It was as if human emotion itself was interfering with the visitors' control. Joy, hope, and unity created a kind of invisible shield. The realization spread quickly. The true rebellion was not about fighting the ships, but about protecting the mind. This discovery gave people more courage. Towns organized festivals under the strange skies, refusing to be silenced. Communities created networks to share experiences and stories. Even in places where fear was strongest, people reminded each other that they were not alone. Humanity's greatest strength, its ability to connect, was turning into its most powerful weapon. The visitors tried harder. They sent stronger pulses, brighter lights, stranger dreams. But every push was met with a new human answer. Some responded with humor, others with prayer, others with stubborn silence. The more the visitors tried to control, the more unpredictable the responses became. And unpredictability was something the visitors could not handle. What had begun as hidden experiments was now turning into something else entirely. The visitors wanted control, but they were losing it. Humanity was showing that even in the face of something far greater, they would not surrender their spirit. The rebellion was unexpected not just to the visitors, but also to humanity itself. No one had planned it, no one had given orders, yet somehow it spread across the world. It showed that deep down, humans shared something the visitors could never replicate: a refusal to be broken, a fire that burned even brighter when tested, and Though the visitors still hovered above, their ships glowing against the night, something had shifted. They were no longer in full control. The experiments had not crushed humanity. Instead, they had awakened it. This was the turning point. Humanity had begun to realize its true strength, and the visitors were beginning to realize their mistake. What was meant to be a simple experiment had become the first spark of rebellion, not of machines or weapons, but of the human spirit itself. And this spirit was something no plan could contain. The strange glow still filled the skies at night. The ships remained above, silent and unshaken. But something had shifted in the world below. People no longer looked up in fear. They looked up with challenge in their eyes, as if daring the visitors to try again. The quiet experiments that once bent human emotions had started losing their grip, and everywhere people were waking up to a new kind of strength. The visitors had come with a plan. They wanted to shape human thoughts, test limits, and prepare the world for control. For a while, they believed they were succeeding. People felt their moods change, saw dreams filled with shadows, and lived in quiet confusion. But then came the rebellion, not with weapons, but with laughter, unity, and courage. The unexpected response confused the visitors. What was supposed to be a smooth experiment was quickly slipping out of their hands. It was during this time that the turning of power began. At first, it was only a whisper. People noticed the more they resisted emotionally, the weaker the strange pulses became. Singing, dancing, storytelling, art, all these human expressions seemed to interfere with the signals. Scientists quietly confirmed this by collecting data. The findings were astonishing. Joy and unity created patterns that blocked or bent the visitors' influence. The invisible control that once seemed unbreakable now looked fragile. News of this spread quickly. It wasn't announced in formal speeches, but in conversations between neighbors, in late-night radio broadcasts, and in quiet posts shared online. People didn't just feel stronger, they knew they were stronger. It was no longer about waiting for someone to save them. It was about saving themselves. The visitors reacted with force. Their ships shone brighter, the pulses stronger, the dreams more vivid. But the harder they pushed, the stronger humanity became in return. It was as if the pressure awakened something, hidden inside people, something even they hadn't known existed. In one city, instead of staying indoors when the sky glowed, people filled the streets. They carried drums, lanterns, and banners, turning the entire night into a celebration. The visitors tried to project confusion and fear, but the rhythm of drums and the roar of thousands of voices singing together drowned it out. The strange glow above began to flicker, like a light struggling to stay lit. For the first time, it looked as though the visitors were weakening. Across the world, similar stories unfolded. Villages painted massive symbols on the ground that could be seen from the sky. Farmers organized patterns in their fields, showing defiance. Schools taught children songs designed to spread strength and joy. What began as scattered acts of resistance had become a worldwide movement. Humanity, once divided by borders and languages, was now united under one silent agreement. They would not be controlled. This was the moment power began to shift. Governments that once tried to calm their citizens now realized they needed to follow them. Leaders saw that control didn't come from authority or force. It came from unity. They began working with scientists, artists, and communities, encouraging people to keep resisting in creative ways. Instead of hiding the truth, they began admitting openly that the visitors were trying to manipulate human minds. That honesty made the bond between leaders and citizens stronger than it had been in generations. The visitors, for all their advanced knowledge, could not understand this. In their view, control was supposed to come from domination, precision, and fear. They had not expected humanity to fight back with something as simple and as unstoppable as the human spirit. Every attempt to break the people was now turning into fuel for their strength. One of the most remarkable shifts happened when people realized they could send messages back, not through technology, but through human will. Large groups began meditating, together focusing their thoughts not on fear but on freedom. Strange results followed. The ships above flickered, the glow dimmed, and sometimes the strange dreams stopped altogether. It was as if the collective human mind had become too strong to influence. This realization spread hope everywhere. People now believed that the mind itself was the greatest shield, and together they could protect it. For the first time in history, the world was moving in one rhythm, not divided by race, language, or nation, but bound by a shared determination to stay human. The turning of power did not happen in one single moment. It unfolded in countless small moments, like sparks that built into a fire. A grandmother teaching children old songs that kept their spirits alive. A group of workers refusing to stop their shift, showing that life would continue no matter what. Teenagers turning their fear into art, painting walls with bright colors that could be seen even from the sky. All these moments joined together into something larger than anyone had imagined. The visitors began to hesitate. They had the technology, the ships, the power, but they no longer had control. Their greatest weapon had been their ability to manipulate, the mind. But now, the mind was out of reach. Humans had not only resisted but discovered strength they hadn't known they carried. The balance was shifting, and the visitors could feel it. For humans, this shift brought confidence. They no longer saw themselves as small against the vastness of the universe. They saw themselves as resilient, unpredictable, and capable of standing even against forces far beyond their world. The skies no longer inspired helplessness. They inspired defiance. In a way, the visitors had created their own defeat. By trying to bend human thoughts, they had forced humanity to unite in a way it had never done before. By trying to break the human spirit, they had only proven how unbreakable it truly was. The turning of power was not about weapons or battles. It was about realization. Humanity discovered that its greatest defense was not in machines or armies, but in connection, creativity, and courage. People who once felt powerless now understood that their laughter, their stories, their dreams were stronger than any pulse from the sky. The visitors hovered above, still watching, still silent. But the world below was different now. People looked at each other with pride instead of fear. They spoke of freedom, not control. The night sky, once filled with worry, now carried the sound of music, chanting, and joy. The balance of power had shifted forever. The visitors had come believing they could control humanity. Instead, they had awakened something greater. The human spirit had risen, and it would not be chained again. The turning of power had begun, and it was only the beginning. When the skies finally grew quiet, and the glow above faded into nothing but ordinary stars, the world stood still. For the first time in what felt like an endless season of tension, people could breathe without feeling the invisible weight pressing on their minds. The visitors had not left completely, but their power was gone. Their great experiment had ended in failure, and what remained was the story of how humanity had faced the unknown and discovered something far greater within itself. The legacy of this time did not lie in battles, because there had been no great war fought with weapons. The legacy lived in the way people had come together, in the way ordinary lives had turned extraordinary, and in the unshakable proof that human spirit could not be controlled. Children born during those days grew up hearing stories about how their parents and grandparents had stood together when fear filled the air. They were told how people laughed in the face of manipulation, how music became a shield, how stories became weapons of light against shadows. These children grew up with pride, not in victories of armies, but in victories of the mind and heart. The legacy spread in quiet ways. Farmers continued planting symbols in their fields, not because they needed to, but because it reminded them of how unity once saved them. Artists filled cities with bright murals, each stroke of paint a reminder that creativity had once weakened a power greater than any machine. Writers filled pages with memories, not just to remember what happened, but to remind future generations, never to forget what they were capable of. It was not about the visitors anymore. It was about humanity itself. What surprised many was how people changed after it all. Before the silent arrival, the world had been divided in countless ways. Borders, politics, rivalries, all had kept people apart. But after the shared experience, those divisions seemed smaller, less important. People had looked up at the same sky, faced the same invisible threat, and survived because they had trusted each other. That bond could not be erased. Communities that once argued over land now worked side by side to rebuild. Nations that once turned their backs on each other now shared knowledge, science, and art more freely than ever before. The understanding was simple. Survival had come from unity, so the future must also be built with unity. One of the most remarkable changes came in how people saw themselves. For centuries, humans had looked at the stars and felt small. They imagined that beings who traveled the galaxies would see them as nothing more than fragile creatures on a fragile world. But now, after everything, humans saw themselves differently. They had faced an intelligence older and stronger than anything they had known, and yet they had not only survived but turned weakness into strength. The stars no longer looked unreachable. They looked like the next horizon. The legacy also shaped science in surprising ways. Researchers who once studied only machines now studied the power of the human mind. They wanted to understand why joy, art, and unity could block something as advanced as the visitor's influence. New fields of study grew, blending psychology, energy, and even culture. What had once been dismissed as just emotion was now recognized as one of the greatest forces in existence. People began to say that humanity had two kinds of power, the power of machines and the power of the spirit. The first built cities, ships, and tools. The second built strength, hope, and freedom. Both were needed, but the second was the one that had carried them through the darkest nights. In time, gatherings were held around the world to honor the moment when the skies cleared. These were not somber ceremonies, but celebrations filled with music, laughter, and food. People danced under the stars not in fear, but in gratitude. Children released lanterns into the sky, not to call for help, but to remind themselves that light could always overcome darkness. Stories were told again and again, sometimes changing in details but never in meaning. The important part was not the exact sequence of events, but the lesson carried within them. Humanity could not be controlled, not by machines, not by shadows, not even by the most powerful minds in the universe. As years passed, the memory of the visitors grew softer, but the legacy remained alive. It was not about remembering them. It was about remembering who people had become because of them. The real story was not about the arrival, the experiment, or even the rebellion. The real story was about how humanity had discovered its own strength, hidden in plain sight all along. The legacy lived in small, everyday acts. When a teacher encouraged children to believe in themselves, it echoed the lessons of that time. When a community worked together after a storm, it carried the same spirit of unity. When people chose to face fear with courage instead of silence, they honored the past without even thinking about it. There were, of course, some who still wondered about the visitors. Why had they come? Why had they failed? Would they return one day? No one had clear answers, but most people did not worry about it. Instead, they focused on what they could control, their lives, their choices, their shared humanity. The stars above were not a threat anymore. They were a promise of what could come next. Some even believed the visitors had left behind a gift, though not intentionally. By trying to bend the human mind, they had forced it to grow stronger. By trying to divide, they had united it. By trying to test humanity, they had revealed the truth. People were far more powerful than they had ever known. And so, the legacy was not fear of the unknown. It was courage to face it. It was not shame in being small. It was pride in being human. It was not a story of control. It was a story of freedom. Generations later, when children asked their elders about the time the skies glowed and the world changed, the answers were always told with a smile. They thought they could control us, the elders would say, but they forgot the most important thing. We are human, and being human means being impossible to control. That sentence became almost like a saying, passed down quietly, but with weight. It was written on walls, whispered in classrooms, sung in songs. It was not meant as defiance toward the visitors anymore. It was a reminder to never forget what had been learned. The world kept moving forward. Cities grew taller, machines grew smarter, and people reached further into the sky with rockets and stations. But the most important progress was invisible. It was the strength carried inside every person, the unspoken memory that unity could overcome anything. The legacy of humanity was not left in monuments of stone or steel, but in the way people lived, loved, and believed. It was in the courage to laugh in the face of fear, the wisdom to stand together, and the endless creativity that no force in the universe could silence. The stars still shone each night, but now they were not reminders of what had come. They were invitations to what might be next. Humanity would one day walk among them, not as servants, not as experiments, but as equals. The story of the silent arrival, the hidden experiment, the rebellion, and the turning of power was complete. But the story of humanity was only beginning, and the legacy left behind was clear. No matter what came from the sky, no matter what tried to bend their spirit, humanity would rise, always beyond imagination.